Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. We have recently hit over 4,000 subscribers and I cannot even begin to tell you all how much it means to me that so many of you out there care about these missing people as much as I do and are willing to take a few minutes out of your busy day to listen to me talk about these missing cases and get their stories out there. When I first started this channel, almost 2 years ago, I honestly wasn't sure if I could get 100 people to watch, so this means the world to me. I did put out a thank you in another video, but that video had to be taken down after only about 20 minutes of being up, so I'm saying it all again because I want you all to know that I am thankful for each and every one of you and very much appreciate your support of what we are trying to do here, which is raise awareness for the missing. So thank you so much. The case I'm going to be talking about today is an older one. I'm talking 63 years ago, but it is one of those that kind of stayed on my mind when I read about it, and when I did a search, I was unable to find a single video or a podcast that had ever been done on it, so I'm going to cover it because I always say no matter how old a case is, it can still be solved. Someone out there may know something or may have heard a story growing up about what could have happened to this woman. Charlotte, North Carolina, 1959. 29-year-old Betty Marie Roberts was the mother of 2 little girls, and she had recently gotten divorced from her husband and the father of her children, George Conrad Atwell. George had been in the Army during World War II, and after that, he was a sheet metal worker in Mecklenburg, North Carolina. We don't know exact dates because, like I said, this is an older case, but it is believed that sometime in October-ish 1959, Betty and her older sister, Louise Doan, who was 43 years old, saw a classified ad in the local paper. The ad stated that a traveling photographer was looking to hire an assistant to do receptionist-type work and set up appointments for people wanting color portraits done. Betty and Louise both applied for the position, and this is how they came to meet a man by the name of Charles Wegman. Charles came to Louise's home on Robinson Circle to interview the sisters. He said he was a photographer from Houston, Texas. He was in his mid to late 30s, and Louise described him as being tall, thick, and pleasant looking. Unfortunately, I could not find a single picture of Charles to share with you all. I myself don't have a clue of what this man looked like. We don't know if Charles hired one or both sisters or simply took a liking to Betty, but later, on November 3rd, Betty came to Louise and told her that she had made the decision to leave town with this Charles Wegman fella and asked Louise to take care of her 2 daughters. Now, Louise was obviously mad, probably because she knew Betty was making a terrible decision to leave her children and go with a man that she did not know. I mean, they had met him, of course, during the interview, but how well do you really know someone after meeting them briefly? You don't. If my sister came to me and told me she was skipping town with some stranger and leaving her kids behind, I'd probably be fit to be tied too. Louise was also likely upset because she and Betty were extremely close and she didn't want her sister to leave her. Louise told Betty, and I quote, "If you walk out, you're not my sister. Don't ever come back." But Louise didn't mean it. She said it out of anger, and there's no way she could have known that it would be the last thing she ever said to her sister. Despite the harsh words from Louise, Betty did leave with Charles Wegman that day and did not take her 2 little girls with her. Betty and Charles said that they were headed to Maryland. Betty grabbed a taxi, which took her to a motel on Highway 49 North to meet Charles. And from there, the 2 drove off together in a Cadillac. A few days later, Louise received a letter from Betty with a Baltimore, Maryland postmark. Betty had written saying she was doing well and would write more later. However, no more letters came from Betty to Louise or anyone else in their family. Betty's 2 little daughters, Nancy and Della, who were only 3 and 4 years old, were sent to an orphanage and then later to foster homes. Louise may not have been able to care for them herself, and I'm unsure why they didn't go to their father, George. In the 1950s, it was common for social workers to take children into state custody without forcing the mother to tell them who the father was. But actually, the article I read was referring to babies that were newly born and given up right away. So I'm unsure how that worked since the girls were ages 3 and 4 and Louise was not their mother. I'm unsure if Louise was just able to drop the girls off without saying who their parents were. Maybe George knew and agreed to it, or perhaps he was completely unaware. I'm really unsure how all of that played out. After not hearing from her sister, besides the one and only letter she received, Louise checked with the Social Security office and the driver's license bureaus, but there were no records for Betty after 1959. Louise did go to the police and the FBI with growing worry for her sister as more time passed with absolutely no word from her. She showed law enforcement photos of Betty and Charles, and this is when agents at the FBI kind of dropped a bomb on her. They told her that Charles Wegman's name was actually Charles Dennison. So the FBI knew who this guy was, but they didn't give Louise any other details other than that. They didn't say how or why they were familiar with this man. Poor Louise. That had to have sent alarm bells going off in her mind. So frustrating that they wouldn't give any explanation, and you'd be wondering if your sister was with a career criminal, a murderer, a con artist. Was he really even a photographer? Or was this a way to lure in an unsuspecting victim? Who was this guy? Now, because Betty left of her own volition, there was no huge investigation done by police or even a search. I'm unsure if Charles was ever tracked down or questioned by police about Betty's whereabouts or where he had last seen her or where they had last been together. I actually couldn't find a single report saying police spoke with him at all. Betty's daughters joined Louise in the search for their mother years later when they grew up and became adults. They, like Louise had done years before, searched motor vehicle records and checked with Social Security. They made phone calls to everyone with the last name Wegman, Dennison, and Atwell in the Houston, Texas, and Baltimore, Maryland area. Yet, they got no closer to information on their mom or this Charles guy. In 1959, Betty was around 5 foot 6 inches tall to 5 foot 7 inches and weighed 130 to 140 pounds. She had brown hair and blue or hazel eyes. She has a scar on her abdomen, a tattoo of the name Jeff on her left forearm, and at the time of her disappearance, she wore dentures. Betty was possibly married to Martin William Jefferson before George Atwell. This could be the meaning of the Jeff tattoo on her arm. Now, it would have been much easier in the 50s and 60s to get a new identity, a new driver's license, new life than it is today. Most driver's licenses, or really any form of ID back in the 1950s, was just a piece of paper that someone had handwritten information on. Most of them didn't even have a picture on it, or if they did, they were just kind of glued or taped on, which, I mean, how easy would that be to just cover up with a new picture? Betty could easily have taken on a new name and made a different life for herself. Maybe being a divorced single mom wasn't the life she wanted, and she decided to start over and never tell anyone new about her past or where she had come from. After all, she did drop everything, including her children, and she left willingly. It's also possible that something horrible happened to Betty, either by the hand of Charles Wegman, aka Charles Dennison, or by someone else. I find it unlikely that Betty would send a letter saying she would keep in touch if she had no intention of doing so, especially since she and Louise were so close. There's no evidence, at least none reported, that Betty and Charles stayed together after they left North Carolina. The FBI knew who he was, but this doesn't necessarily mean they knew him because of crimes he had committed. Maybe he was an informant or worked for them in some way. They obviously knew of him well enough to identify him by his picture. I find it very odd that the FBI didn't give Louise any information on why or how they knew who he was. I'm sure some of you out there are going to question whether or not this Charles guy even existed and suggest that maybe Louise made up the whole story to cover for her own involvement in Betty's disappearance. Nothing is impossible, but the fact that Louise went to great lengths and efforts to find Betty for years, I'm talking decades, and even had a picture of Charles to show the police and FBI agents, I think that theory is highly unlikely. I don't believe Louise had anything at all to do with Betty's vanishing. According to the websites And They Were and Missing Person Commentary, I will link them both down in the description box. But according to those websites, there's no information out there on a Charles Wegman. But there are 2 entries in the Texas inmate records for a Charles Clifford Dennison. Charles was a native to Texas, and he did have a criminal record. He had done some jail time in the late 1940s and early 1950s for burglary and theft. He had served in the Army and/or Merchant Marines and lived in New York for a time. According to Ancestry.com, a Charles Dennison was born in Houston, Texas on September 22nd of 1922 or 1923, and he passed away in August of 1983 in Harris County, Texas. That's pretty much all we know about him. Louise searched for Betty until her eyes went bad and she could no longer take on the task. She passed away on May 23rd of 2008 at the age of 91, never finding out what happened to her sister Betty. In Louise's obituary, Betty was listed as a surviving member of the family. Now, if Betty were alive today, she would be 91 years old, almost 92 at the time of this video. I am not expecting her to still be alive out there somewhere, although she very well could be, but there is a chance someone out there may know what happened to her. Maybe they have heard stories of Betty and Charles, or perhaps they met one or the other sometime in their life. Perhaps they became friends with Betty after 1959, but knew her under a different name and would recognize her pictures. Betty's daughters, Nancy and Della, deserve to know what happened to their mother, even though they were so young when she left that they don't really remember her. They still need to know. They aren't mad at her for leaving. They just want to know where she went and what she ended up doing with her life if she did in fact start over. All they have left of her is a cardboard box full of faded photographs, newspaper articles, postcards, and poems. If you know anything, even if you heard maybe a rumor growing up and think the information could be beneficial, please contact the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department at 704-336-7600. This case is an older one, but it's still important, and Betty mattered. Even if she made a bad choice to leave her kids, I don't think she meant for it to be permanent. In my opinion, I really think this Charles guy lured her away with fake promises of a glamorous photography career, travel, true love, and all the things she wanted and never had. And she believed him. What happened after they drove off into the sunset? We don't know, but maybe someone out there does. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and I would also suggest checking out my entire missing playlist, as each case I cover is super important and deserves more exposure. I will see you all in the next one.